Welcome back to the Intermediate and Advanced Spring track. I'm glad you've chosen to join us for this next talk. Please welcome our next presenter, Mahmoud bin Hassine. Mahmoud is presenting What's New in Spring Batch. Take it away, Mahmoud.
Okay. Thank you, Roy, for this introduction. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. I hope everyone is safe and healthy during these challenging times. And I hope everyone is enjoying the conference so far. We have 5 tracks all running in parallel with great content. So I really appreciate that you chose this one. Let me share my screen. So this presentation is about what's new in Spring Batch 4.3, which is not released yet. Some of the features I'm going to present here are still a work in progress and might not make it to the final release. So this is a quick disclaimer about that. A few words about me. My name is Mahmoud, and I am part of the Spring Batch team at VMware. I'm not very active on social media, but you can find me on GitHub and Twitter, so feel free to reach out to me using these handles. In this presentation, I wanted to give you a quick overview about the current status of Spring Batch, what's new in the upcoming 4.3 version in terms of new features, performance improvements, etc., and what's coming next after that. So let me start with a quick overview of the current status as of today, September 2020. This is a timeline of all major releases of Spring Batch since the beginning. I'm not going to talk about each release, but if we fast forward to today, we should be somewhere here between October 2019, when we released 4.2 last year, and October 2020, when we are planning to release 4.3, which is the version I'm going to present in this talk. So as of today, the current stable version is 4.2. And it's the only supported version for now. All previous versions have been deprecated. So we encourage everyone to migrate to this latest and greatest 4.2. I have 2 key notes I wanted to share in this session. The first one is that 4.3 will be the last feature release in the V4 line. The next one will be V5. And I will give you more details about the roadmap later on in this talk. So this is the first note. And the second one is about the release cadence. As you might know, some of the projects from the portfolio decided to switch to a 6-month release cadence, like Spring Boot, for instance. And for Spring Batch, we decided to follow the same cadence as Spring Framework, which is basically yearly based. So those are the 2 key notes I wanted to share with you in this session about the current status. Now let's talk about what's new in V4.3, which is currently in milestone 2. And this means everything is subject to change until we go RC. Okay. Let me start with the new features. One of the features I'm really excited about is the support of Java 14 records as items in chunk-oriented steps. Spring Batch already relies on Spring Framework for data mapping already, and we are going to leverage Spring Framework support for records as well in this feature. Let me give you a quick example. So let's say we have a flat file, a CSV file called persons.csv containing some persons data, and a corresponding Java bean, person Java bean, okay? So if you want to read data from that file using Spring Batch, we typically write a flat file item reader like this. So we define the reader name, the resource, we specify fields, and then a target type, person.class here, which is expected to be a Java bean, okay? Now the idea is that if I have a person record, and not a Java bean, I would like to be able to use it in my Spring Batch application. So we will typically try to make this as transparent as possible to end users, meaning that there shouldn't be or wouldn't be a need for code change to define the reader. We will try, for example, to introspect the person type and see if it's a record or a Java bean and adapt the internals accordingly. But this is not guaranteed. We might add a flag to support this feature or something like that. But the idea is that we try to make it as transparent to users as possible. This example is obviously about flat files, but the goal is to support record mapping for databases, XML files, JSON files, etc. And this will be really cool because if we can use records in Spring Batch, this means we will write a lot less ceremony code to define items. So instead of writing a Java bean with getters, setters, equals hash code, etc., we will write a record to define the item, and all other methods will be generated by the compiler. So this is the first feature I wanted to present. The second one is about GraalVM support, which is a hot topic at the moment. There is a lot of work that has been done already in Spring Framework to support running some types of Spring applications on GraalVM, and we will leverage that support in Spring Batch as well, since we are based on Spring Framework. But there are some code changes we need to make in Spring Batch itself, typically regarding reflection, proxying, batch artifacts, etc. And in this release, we implemented those changes, and now you can run Spring Batch applications on GraalVM. However, this is still experimental, so we encourage everyone to give the next RC, will contain these changes, to give the next RC a try and share feedback with us so we can improve the support. And this should give us faster startup times and better memory usage. Now, another improvement we added in this release is about Kafka support. We introduced Kafka support last year in 4.2, and we've got a lot of great feedback since then. And when we introduced the new Kafka item reader, it was always reading from the beginning of a topic partition. And there was no obvious way to tell it to read from a custom offset in the partition. It was not very convenient. And one of the improvements we got is that to make the reader configurable in order to read from a custom offset in the partition and not from the beginning. And we listened to our users, and we added this feature in 4.3. And now it's possible to tell the reader to start reading from a custom offset instead of the beginning of the partition. And as a result of this addition, it's now possible to tell the reader to start reading from the offset stored in Kafka and not in Spring Batch. So instead of giving a precise offset, we can tell the reader to start reading from the offset stored in Kafka. So that's another addition. Another feature is the support of annotation-based job execution listeners. So up until now, the only way to register a job execution listener is by implementing the interface job execution listener. So we need to implement the interface or extend a support class we have in the library. And in this release, we added the ability to use any class as a listener as soon as you annotate methods with at before job and after job. So this is the expected signature, but at least you don't have to implement the interface anymore. So you can use this class as a listener, as a job listener in your Spring Batch job. This is a bit similar to step listeners and chunk listeners, where it's already possible to use the annotations. And in this release, we added support for job listeners as well. The last but not least addition in this release is the introduction of a synchronized item stream writer. The issue we are facing here is that some item writers are not safe to use in a multi-threaded step, like the stacks event item writer or the JSON item writer. And I prepared an example to explain the issue. So let's say we have some person data in a database and we want to export them in an XML file. This is a typical bean definition for the stacks event item writer. So we define a marshaller, in this case, based on JAX-B, and then start defining the writer. We give it a name, the resource, the output file, and the marshaller that I defined previously, and the root tag name persons. Now, if you use this writer in a multi-threaded step, you might be expecting the output to be something like this. We have the persons tag around the content, and then for each item, we have a person tag. This is what you might expect, but you will actually get something like this. So tags will be mixed, they are not in the right order, etc. And this is because the writer will be shared between multiple threads in the multi-threaded step, and it is not thread safe. So to fix this issue, there are multiple ways. We can extend the class and synchronize the write method, or write a separate class, which is a decorator, to wrap the unsafe writer and make it thread safe, etc. And in this release, we introduced the SynchronizedItemStreamWriter, which is this one. And now it's possible to wrap the original bean, the original writer, non-thread safe one, in this synchronized one, and everything should work as expected. So instead of the user having to create a class or an extension, it's now part of the standard library, and we can use it to synchronize writers. And with that, I finished my quick tour of the major highlights in this version. Of course, we have a lot of other minor features that I'm not going to present in too much detail here, like the support for named queries in the JPA item reader, the support for custom encodings in the XML reader, the stacks event item reader. We introduced a lot of improvements in micrometer support that we introduced in 4.2, etc., etc. Some of the features have been already described in these blog posts, but of course, all the features will be detailed in the final release notes. So that's all for the new features. Let me now present the performance improvements. And the first one is in the Mongo item writer. So currently, to use the Mongo item writer, the implementation iterates over all the items in the chunk and calls save on each one. So in order to persist the items in a collection, it will iterate over all items and call save on each one of them. This is, of course, not optimal in terms of performance. And in this release, we changed the implementation of the writer to use the bulk operations API. This is from Spring Data MongoDB. And now we get a bulk operation from the template, add all items to it, and then execute the bulk operation in one shot. So we did a benchmark of this change. And we noticed that the new version is actually 20 times faster than the previous one. So this is a significant improvement. Of course, all these numbers depend on the input size, the environment, the version, etc. So I added a link to the code of the benchmark here, so you can try it yourself and measure the improvement in your specific case. So this is the first improvement. Okay. The second improvement is similar to the previous one. It's in the repository item writer. So this writer is backed by a Spring Data repository. And in order to use it, we need to specify a method name to use for each item, like save or update. And with this approach, we will iterate over all items of the chunk and call this method on the repository. Same thing as in the Mongo item writer. This is not optimal, and we changed the implementation in this release to use a single call to the save all method with all items at once. So this is the default in v4.3. We did a benchmark, and it's 2 times faster with this version for 1 million items. This is also relative to the environment, to the input size, etc. And you have a link to the benchmark, so you can run it yourself. So this is the second improvement, very similar to the previous one. And we have another one, a third one, which is about jobs and steps startup time. So as you might know, when we start a new job or restart a failed one, Spring Batch does a number of checks to validate a few conditions. For example, checking if the current execution is a new execution or a restart of a failed one, or checking that the number of executions does not exceed the start limit. So as you might know, we can specify a start limit for a step or job. And all these checks involve a call to this method called getStepExecutionCount, which, as its name implies, counts the number of step executions for a given job instance and a step name. And in Fordo 2, we noticed that this method was loading all job executions in memory, and then for each one of them, loading all step executions, and then doing the count in memory. This is not optimal in terms of performance and memory usage, so we changed the implementation to use a single count query to the database. So basically, we moved the calculation logic from the framework side to the database side, and databases are well optimized for this kind of operations. And with this change, the execution time of this method, according to our benchmark, is 6 times faster, and which in turn, of course, improves the startup time of steps and jobs, if the step is the first one in the job. So this is the third improvement we introduced, the major one. There are, of course, a lot of other minor improvements that I'm not going to share here, but those are the major ones, and you will find the whole list in the Find the Release notes. So that's all for the performance improvements. I wanted to give you a quick update about dependency updates in this version. Like all the releases, we took the opportunity to upgrade and update Spring projects that we depend on Batch to the latest versions. And those are the versions for Spring Batch 4.3. So namely Spring Framework 5.3, Integration 5.4, etc. Obviously, the best way to manage dependencies is via Spring Boot, but for non-boot users, those are the transitive dependencies you should expect from Spring Batch 4.3. Now, a last thing I wanted to talk about in this session is deprecations and technical debt. This is not something new we are shipping in this release, but I thought it's important to mention it in this session. So, as I mentioned, since 4.3 will be the last feature release in the fourth line, we took the opportunity to work on APIs deprecation in preparation for V5, the next major version. We are not going to remove any deprecated API in 4.3, which is a minor version, but we might remove all deprecated APIs in the next major version. So we encourage everyone to migrate as soon as 4.3 is released, and then try to replace any usage of a deprecated API with the suggested replacement. And basically, those suggested replacements are in the Java doc, so you can find them and do the change. And we took also the opportunity to work on some technical debt in preparation to prepare the field for the next major version, which includes improving the build process, improving the testing infrastructure, typically introducing Docker-based tests with the test containers library, which is awesome, by the way. We are aiming to use the Unit 5 for the new tests we introduce in the code base, etc. We also try to improve the test coverage, and all of this is some kind of hidden work in the background, but I thought it's worth mentioning in this session so that people know what we are working on. So that's all for the 3. Now let me give you a quick overview about the current plans in the near future, in the short and midterms. We will be releasing a first RC1 in a couple of weeks with Java 14 support, GraalVM support. So we encourage everyone to give it a try when it's out. And after that, we are planning to release the GA by the end of October. After that, we will work on some round of bug fix releases for the 2 and for the 3 lines, which will have the same lifetime as Spring Boot 2.3 and 2.4 respectively. So this should bring us to the end of the year. And after that, we are planning to start working on V5, which is the next major version, which will be based on Spring Framework v6. Of course, we don't have a release date yet, as this depends on Spring Framework and other projects. But as soon as we have a concrete plan, we will share it with you, either on GitHub via a milestone or on Twitter or via a blog post. Okay. So that's all I have for this session. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have a good overview now on what's coming in this new version. And I'm open for any question, concern, comment. This is the Slack channel. I will be monitoring, and you can ask any question. I will be available there.
All right, thanks, Mahmoud. That was great stuff. If you want to keep discussing Spring Batch with Mahmoud, head on over to the Q&A session starting right now. You'll find the link on the session breakout page. So yeah, we're going to be back with the next session in about 5 to 10 minutes. See you then.